Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And gosh, it's great to have Harley Schlanger back. What an exciting and amazing time we are living through right now. Harley, how are you doing today?
Ah,
Busy,
well,
right?
the confirmation hearings are starting, and that's something we've got to pay attention to. And there's so much going on. I was following the last 24 hours, trying to get a better beat on why Steve Bannon thinks he can take over the MAGA movement.
Oh, no.
Well, you saw what he said about Musk.
No, I try to not look at Steve Bannon too much, Harley.
Well, he went a little nuts. He said that that Musk is a racist. That he said it's my job to get Musk out of the MAGA movement,
Wow.
get him away from Trump.
Uh,
And he said that he's part of this technocratic billionaire club, and that he's trying to use the HB1 visa for his own benefit and the benefit of other techies. And he's an egotist. He's evil. I mean, he just laid the whole thing out there. And of course, Trump defended Musk when Bannon first attacked him on those visas. So the question that I have is, I'm not surprised to see Bannon out front like this, but look at the timing. You're less than a week now till Trump becomes president again. And it's a period where he's got a lot on his plate to try and figure out how to deal with Putin, with Ukraine, with the confirmations, and all of a sudden Bannon is coming after him, hell bent on causing a reaction. So I'm just a little curious as to who's pulling the strings there.
Well, we can try to pull those strings, but I want to ask you a broader question this morning because it is the last show before the inauguration,
Sure.
and that is this: what can President Trump actually be a peacemaker? And I base that on what the reporting of his emissary to Netanyahu over the past couple of days, and how maybe Trump's able to knock heads and make people, act right. That's my question. What do you think?
Well, he's he's going to have to do that because what Biden, and I should say Blinken and his crew, set up is an almost impossible situation between Ukraine and Israel. And Trump is coming in where there are two situations out of control. Now, Ukraine is not so far out of control because Ukraine is essentially defeated, although the Europeans are trying to prop it up. I think if on that one, the obvious point is Trump should go meet with Putin. And he's got to hear what Putin has to say, why Putin won't accept what Kellogg laid out as a compromise agreement. And Trump, of course, being a negotiator, maybe with Putin he can sit down and there's probably some mutual respect there, and they can come up with something. The Israel situation is different because Netanyahu is not going to knuckle down unless Trump really comes at him with a threat to cut off all aid. Now, I thought it was fascinating that Trump played the Jeffrey Sachs card. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
He put on his Truth Social a video of Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu an evil bastard, talking about genocide in Israel.
Oh, right, right. I did see that. I guess I didn't associate it with Trump's social media, but I did see the clip. Wow.
Well, Trump put it up there, and it freaked out Netanyahu and the Israelis
Yeah.
because they're saying, let's just keep this going until he gets in, and then we can have our way. We can go get Iran. And Trump is saying, we're not going to have a war. You've got to settle this. And I think if he intends to do something, he probably can, because he's not going to have people surrounding him who are going to try and pull him back. So he's got what you might call a historic opportunity to knock out two wars at once. Now that's too much, but I think he's trying to set the tone for the Middle East, Southwest Asia, by telling Netanyahu, I'm coming at you if you don't do what we say. And, Blinken did this. I don't know if you saw it. Blinken was on 60 Minutes, and he was asked, aren't you concerned that people will say you condoned genocide? And Blinken didn't answer for about 2 or 3 seconds. He sat there staring, and then he said, well, I don't think that's right. And he said, let the facts speak for themselves. And of course, the facts are that you've had probably 100,000 Palestinians killed or severely hurt. The numbers are much bigger than the 45,000 official because they still haven't dug up the rubble. The Israelis are openly saying, in fact, a member of the Knesset just put a bill, one of Netanyahu's cronies put in a bill saying it's legal for Israel to withhold food and water. And, is that what the Knesset's going to debate? So, I think it's clear from Israel that they're committed to playing this all the way out. So the question then, your question is, how much can Trump undertake at once? And I think he's going to try and solve the Ukraine situation. And he's realizing it's not so simple because now you've got the problem of Europe. And this just came up at the Ramstein Air Base, the almost monthly meeting of the Ukraine Defense Council, where you have all the Europeans there saying, we've got to fight, we got to stay in there, we're going to do it even without the United States if we have to. And Poland is talking about 5% of their budget going to defense. But what else is going on in Europe? Croatia, the election, a pro-Putin, anti-Zelensky presidential candidate had a landslide. Romania, the EU had to come in and cancel an election because they didn't like the way it turned out. Is that democracy? Then you've got Fico from Slovakia who's saying we can have a peace conference here in my country. Georgia has a president who's very strongly oriented toward Putin. So Europe is shifting. And in Austria, my wife's Heimat, her home state, Austria, the Green president, von der Bellen, admitted that he couldn't get an agreement between the equivalent of the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. So he turned it over to the FPÖ, the Freedom Party, and said, okay, you form a government. And they're happy to do that. And in Germany, they're looking at that in Austria and they're saying, oh no, are we going to have the same fate? And the polls are showing the AfD is gaining on the Christian Democrats. And that, of course, was helped when Elon Musk did an interview with Alice Weidel, the Alternative for Deutschland chancellor candidate. So, Eastern Europe, except for Poland and the Baltic states, Eastern Europe is moving away from the war. Germany is in chaos. France, no one's sure what the hell Macron's next move is going to be. The one country that's completely firmly committed in all parties, at least most of the parties, is the United Kingdom. But Starmer is facing some big problems because they're basically addressing this question of how come when he was the head of the Crown Prosecutorial Services, there was so much child rape going on and it wasn't being prosecuted, including the famous cases like Jimmy Savile. So, Starmer's, I think he has, like they said of Liz Truss, maybe his time in office will be like how long a lettuce can keep from spoiling on a shelf. So, what Trump has going for him is the shift going on in Europe. And it's not just the Eastern European parties, it's the population in Western Europe, which is not committed to suffering for the sake of this hope for Ukrainian democracy. And if you look at Ukraine, it's not very democratic. So, what we just had a meeting over the weekend where we discussed what's on the agenda for us. What's the LaRouche movement have to do over the next 30 to 60 days? Well, you have the inauguration next week, and then a little more than a month later, you have the German election. This is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to present an alternative based on the idea that the old system is dying. The old system can't be saved. It can still do a lot of damage, but it can't be saved or protected. Now, Trump has one foot in the old system. That is, he still has this idea of American military power and American economic power, which is really not so powerful right now. And he has his other foot in looking for peace, looking for partners to work with. And including in those partners would be possibly Xi Jinping and Putin. So if he's going to have to stand up against Europe, I think some of the Europeans in Western Europe are getting nervous. They think they see Trump orienting toward Russia and China. And in Germany now, there's increasing talk about mending ties with Russia. And this includes, on the left, they're saying, let's rebuild the Nord Stream pipeline. On the right, the Alternative for Deutschland, and left and right are pretty much meaningless. But the AfD is saying, yeah, let's rebuild the pipeline, but let's figure out who blew it up and charge them with fixing it. What's Trump going to do if Tulsi Gabbard gets confirmed and she gets intelligence reports that say it was the U.S. that blew up the pipeline? So, there's so much moving, John, so many moving parts. It's hard to stay on top of it. So when you ask me, how am I doing? My head is spinning. I mean, it's really trying to direct some of the younger people in our organization, teach them history and economics, at the same time deploying them into the Congress to try and move the Congress in a competent direction, trying to figure out how we can develop good flanks so that Trump has someone he can listen to besides some of these ideologues. So that's our situation right now, in a nutshell. Does that answer your question? Can Trump get peace? I'm not sure I can answer it.
I still have to hear about China.
Well, now this is one of the most fascinating ones. Look what's happening in California now.
Yeah.
This is it's a horrible way of putting it, but this is something that will help Trump, because the California problem is not global warming, it's environmentalism. They wouldn't vote to clean up the dead brush. They didn't vote to repair the waterways and to make sure there's flowing of water. They shut down nuclear power plants. They sent firefighting equipment to Ukraine. They did almost everything that would lead to a perfect storm. And these fires are not new. California has always had forest fires, but when you leave more dead brush around, they're going to get bigger. Now, what did Trump say? This was fascinating. I don't know if you saw this, John. He did an interview where he said, look, there's a lot of water in Canada and the Northwest that flows into the Pacific Ocean. Why don't we bring it down? Bring it into California. Now, that's a perfect example of an American infrastructure project that would have enormous benefits for the whole West Coast. It could also work to improve U.S.-Mexican relations, because the original NWAPA plan, the North America Water and Power Alliance, which we kept alive for years after the Parsons Company let it drop. You've seen the stuff we've done on NWAPA, right?
Yes, indeed. It's a fascinating and really inspiring project.
Now, here's the other. To me, this is the flank that we can use. A bill was introduced in 1968 in the U.S. Senate to make NWAPA the American Water Project. Again, NWAPA stands for North American Water and Power Alliance. It was developed in the late 50s, early 60s by essentially the same kind of engineers that did the TVA project, but people from the West Coast. And what it entails is taking the water from Canada and Alaska that runs off into the Pacific, surplus water, plenty of it. Use the Rocky Mountain Trench, dig some canals, channel that water into the area of Northern and Southern California. You have hydroelectric possibilities. You also have nuclear plants that can do nuclear desalination from the ocean. So there would be plenty of water. Now, in 1968, then Senator Robert F. Kennedy introduced a bill to make NUAPA a national infrastructure project for the United States. Sitting next to Trump now is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Will he revive his father's dream? This could be really fascinating, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And you know, while we're being optimistic, you know, the whole JFK theme of we will go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it is hard, because we want to challenge, you know, humanity and we're going to do this. And so now we have a similar kind of mission, and that is to go to Mars, given to us courtesy of Elon Musk and President Trump. That it serves economically as a possible way to survive the absence of war. If we can transfer, you know, our military budget gradually but sensibly and responsibly into doing big things again, then perhaps the economy can survive the absence of ongoing war that has been the story of our lives. Harley, what do you think?
Well, absolutely. I don't know if you saw the discussion between Musk and Alice Weidel,
No.
but that was the last 15 minutes of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
He brought up the imperative of getting to Mars. Now, again, this was, you know, when LaRouche ran for president in the 80s, I think it was in 88, we did a video called The Woman on Mars. And he said, this is where we should be going. And the media went crazy. Well, LaRouche says the Queen of England pushes drugs, and now he says we need to be on Mars. Well, this guy had some foresight. I'll just say that as a simple way of putting it. He, in a sense, came up with the strategy that would get us out of this old dead system 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. A new international development bank to replace the central banking system, which is moribund, which is the only thing it produces is debt. The idea of major infrastructure, and we see what China's doing with their infrastructure programs. We look at the global south. What do they want? They want infrastructure. They don't want lectures on LGBTQ. They don't want to be told that they have to be more democratic, meaning do what the IMF tells them. They're trying to figure out how to take a growing youth population and give them a future. And the future of the world is in Africa. Africa is going to have over 2 billion people. I think it's 2.5 billion people by 2050. And right now, the majority of the population is under 24 years old in Africa. And so it's those young people, including the children, who, unfortunately, we see what's happening in Sudan, where there's a deliberate genocide. But for the rest of the continent, there's a move toward this idea of development is the name for peace. So if you want to be optimistic, the fact that Musk was talking to Alice Weidel, and she said, well, it sounds good. I don't know enough about it. Now, when was the last time a U.S. candidate said they didn't know enough about it? So I think if you get to listen to this discussion, Musk was quite enthusiastic. And again, where did this idea come from? The extraterrestrial imperative was a German space scientist named Kraft Erika, who was part of the von Braun group, except he didn't work at Peenemünde. But he wrote a book called The Extraterrestrial Imperative, and he said it's not just a question of escaping Earth, it's a question of exploring the universe. And this is where the future lies. Man getting increasing power over the forces of nature and using it for the benefit of mankind. And this is almost what Trump was talking about. This is what Musk was talking about, that we need these kinds of missions. So if you put that together with the idea of ending the war with Russia, getting back to space cooperation with Russia, and what's the other country on the other two countries that are moving ahead very rapidly in these areas? China and India, BRICS members. India has a moon Mars plan. China has a moon Mars plan. And what did Kennedy say in 1963? Let's work together on this.
Right.
So I see this as an aha moment. Now, can Trump be able to keep focused on this and act in a way that inspires the American people to do it? That's the question. But when I saw him talking about water from Alaska, I mean, it's one thing for him to bash Gavin Newsom. That's pretty easy to do. But then turn around and say, we can bring water down. We can have, there's no reason for us to have empty reservoirs. There's no reason for us to have these overhead power lines. There are many ways to do it differently, because that's part of what's happening is the wind and the fires knock down the power lines and they fall into the dry brush and boom, you got another fire. I used to live in Glendale, which is right at the line next to Pasadena, where the fires were, and Altadena, where the fires were quite intense.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think 15 years ago, being out one night looking up into the sky, and the whole sky was red because it was the southern part of the mountain chain that Los Angeles is a part of. It was just burning up. And the fire department was driving through the streets saying, you will be notified in the next hour if you need to evacuate. So it's not as though they shouldn't be prepared, but they weren't. And this is the United States has no redundancy when it comes to infrastructure. We saw it with the flooding and hurricanes in North Carolina. We see it now in California. We saw it 2 years ago with the cold wave that froze Texas. That's our future. We have to protect against that, and not to make us the number one country in the world, but to show that we're going to be a nation that takes care of its people. And I think if Trump can be oriented toward that, give up his quest to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and think about building up the United States in a proper way, I think we could have a very, very interesting moment to see what are the Democrats going to say. What are they going to offer as an alternative?
Well, it is an exciting idea that we could be positive and almost renew the spirit of JFK to, go further than mankind has gone before and explore the universe, because, that's who we are. We are expressing our humanity. And as I think about this, and the more I study it, it becomes less cloudy as to who's running the technocracy, the Bertrand Russell nightmare, and who's against it. And at least at this point in my life, I think there's hope that there's enough power against it that it may be overcome. It's a mystery to me how we're going to get out from under this financial nightmare, but without, continuing.
John, as a good Catholic, you should know the Jubilee year.
Oh, well, it is, but is the price of Jubilee going to be digital central bank, digital currency?
I don't think the Pope has control over the kind of currency that we have.
I think the currency has a little control over the Pope, though.
Well, he does, but the moral incentive to have a Jubilee year where people recognize the need to take care of the unfortunate. And this then spills over into things like Gaza. How much longer will Americans tolerate Blinken saying, well, I had a 9-hour meeting with Netanyahu to try to convince him he's got to provide more humanitarian aid to the Palestinians? How can you possibly argue that you spent 9 hours with that nutcase trying to argue with him? Netanyahu from the beginning was, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Blinken had the ultimate leverage. You're not going to do it, then you get no more money. And he didn't do it. This just exposes what hypocritical frauds and liars the Biden administration turned out to be under people like Blinken and Sullivan, who bragged to Hillary Clinton in 2012, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So in burying the old system, we have an opportunity to expose what is the real nature of British geopolitics, the Anglo-American Empire. And it's not just to name names and connect dots. It's, do we intend to live as human beings on this one planet or not? And that's what Kennedy was asking. And I think that spirit can be revived. I don't know how deep Trump is in thinking on these things. I was really surprised the way he talked about the question of water, and his thinking about the fact that he went and after having said, I'm a Zionist, I'm going to defend Israel, then he pushes out on his website Jeffrey Sachs saying that Netanyahu is a dark bastard and we got to stop supporting them. So, one of the things, John, that I've learned over the years is that it's okay if politicians sometimes change their minds, especially if their minds were in a bad direction. And, maybe on this question of the Middle East, if Trump really wants peace, he could do it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I can't help but see him as more of a humanist than a technocrat, and that distinction is something I think we need to draw out, because the technocracy is so powerful now, and sadly, Elon Musk is part of that. When you think of the power of having all of those satellites riding around above us, that who knows what kind of weapons they can carry, or just direct other weapons. The power of having that, and it also has got to have come from military sources. Ultimately, the amount of money that it would take to do what he's done got to be sponsored by people that are really deep inside the military culture, and the ones that would like to just control everything.
But that's the whole Silicon Valley got its start through contracts with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration. And that's how the computer was eventually brought online. When they first started, you had computers that were these gigantic monstrosities that now, you have more power in a cell phone than they used to have in these huge blocks of buildings. Look, there's this concept of dual use technology, like splitting the atom.
Yeah.
You can split the atom to create fearsome weapons, or you can split the atom to produce electricity and use atomic principles in medicine. So the idea of dual use. Now, technocracy depends on the mindset of the technocrat. If a technocrat is out for himself and out for power and money, that's a pretty bad thing, because then they have a technology that can help them do it.
Right.
And our assumption is that Musk is, and this is what Bannon was saying, Musk is just out for himself, and these other bad guys like Peter Thiel and the crew in Silicon Valley. Well, perhaps he's not. Perhaps he's sitting there on $500 billion and is realizing there are better uses for that than just buying cars and houses, as opposed to someone like Jeff Bezos, who is buying up, or Larry Fink of BlackRock, who's buying up land like it's going out of style. And this is just one other point I want to make on this. We're putting out two dossiers. One is on who's out to stop Gabbard and Patel. Now, we start by saying, look, we're not saying Gabbard and Patel are great and they're going to do all sorts of good things. What we are going to do is defend them as opponents to the security state. And they are. Now, the fact that Gabbard did a little backtracking on this question of the FISA court, she was basically told by Republicans that they're not going to support her unless she does. Well, what's to say that after she's confirmed in 2 months, she says, "Look, I've reconsidered this. It was a mistake what I said. We've got to put the FISA court under regulation." So, again, we're not saying these are the two greatest people ever, but I'm convinced Patel really does want to smash the people who ran Russiagate, and he knows where the bodies are buried. He has a book on gangsterism in Washington, which has a list of 60 people he said are the main criminals that have to be taken, that have to be held to account. Gabbard knows the British role in Syria. She also is an opponent of she's spoken out against the idea that Putin's actions were unprovoked. So we put out a dossier which goes through a couple of key points: Syria, the FISA court, the Russiagate. Who are the opponents of Gabbard? They're the people who have been lying, using the intelligence community to perpetrate lies for the sake of war. So why should anyone listen to James Clapper? Why should anybody trust John Brennan? These guys have been exposed repeatedly as liars. So we put out this aide memoir, about a 12-page report on who are the people who are saying Gabbard has no experience. And it's interesting, among the people who say that are Sir Richard Dearloffe, who has plenty of experience of manufacturing phony dossiers used to get the United States into wars. So this is something that people can, you can write to me and I'll send you a link to it if you want. It's harleysch@gmail.com. We want to get this dossier out and get the population involved in calling the Senate and telling them, don't give in to this pressure from the intelligence community. We have a chance to actually drain the swamp. Now, that's going to require support from the population. So I think this is one of the things that we're working on. The second thing we're working on is a dossier on BlackRock. And this is important because BlackRock is at the heart of continuing the Ukraine war. Why? Because they want investment into Ukraine because they've bought up the best farmland in Ukraine. They own some of the mineral rights. Zelensky's just doing a fire sale on Ukraine to get money. And BlackRock's at the center of it. Now, why is that especially important? It's important for the United States, for people to know who's making the war policy. But the candidate for chancellor in Germany, who's leading in the polls, Friedrich Merz, for the last 6 years was the head of BlackRock Germany. And he's the one who's saying we need to give the Taurus missiles, the most powerful cruise missiles that the Germans have, to Ukraine. He's the one who says, I'm a transatlanticist, and people are making jokes about that the transgender Atlanticist, because he hangs out with the elites who, like the grouping out in California, the whatever it's called, the George Shultz and others were part of, the Bohemian Grove. No one's really sure what they do in these secret meetings. But anyway, we want to get the story to the German people so they know that if they vote for Merz, they're voting for BlackRock. They're voting for the war machine. And I think we're seeing a shift in the population. Merz has fallen 3% in polls in the last week, and the AfD has gone up 2%. And that was before polling after this vital Musk discussion. So, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that if Trump does want to fight for peace, he's going to have the backup to do it. And in Germany, we're going to try and give, between January 20th and February 23rd, when the elections are, give them a real understanding of what's the future for Germany if they stick with this existing ruling party. So that's what we're doing.
Well, I was going to say, Harley, you certainly do have all your hands full, and probably a few of your feet busy too most of the time. I'm really astonished at the breadth of your undertakings, as well as, of course, it's always such a treat to talk to you about history and politics and everything else. But is her name Sarah Vidal? Is that her name?
No, it's Alice Vital.
Alice,
Alice Vital.
Alice Vital, and I saw her on a clip on my X feed yesterday, and she's going to reopen the Nord Stream,
Yeah.
and she's going to close the borders of
Yeah.
Germany, and she's going to do what she coined a word, remigration.
Remigration. Yeah.
Remigration. That sounds awfully far right to me
Well,
in terms of the
that's what
migration.
we got to work on. But
Gotcha.
let me tell you what we're doing on that. There are people in her party who are saying that if you really want to deal with the migration problem, which they do need to, because Germany has almost 2 million Syrian refugees, it's having a huge impact on the school system. And this is the legacy of Angela Merkel. But what the AfD can go one of two ways, like the Nigel Farage and others are saying, send them back. Or you can say, why are so many refugees coming here? Because of the wars and the economic policy that the advanced sector is supporting. If you cut off credit to countries so people are starving, and then launch wars such as Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, why would you be surprised that people are fleeing, looking for a safe place to go? And to the extent that it's a narrowly focused, we're going to close the borders and send everyone else back. What she's actually saying, she's being very specific. We're going to send back people who have criminal records, people who have been involved in illegal activity, and otherwise, it's a question mark what they're going to do. But if they take the approach that used to be the approach in Germany, back when Helmut Schmidt was the chancellor, of using German technology to help develop these poorer countries. That's what the Chinese are doing. You create markets for your goods, goodwill, and you also create an incentive for people to stay in their home country and improve their own country. Now, I find it interesting. You know what could be a model for this? The new president of Mexico. I don't know if you saw this, but when Trump was talking about changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America,
Yeah.
she took it as him trolling. So she used humor, and she stood in front of a map from, I think it was 1680 or 17, maybe it was 1780, showing the United States as Mexican America. And, that's the way you have to treat these things. That you have a laugh and then you sit down and negotiate. What does Mexico need? Well, Trump was working with Lopez Obrador to provide credit to help build a rail that could connect ports at the southern tip of Mexico, so you'd have an Atlantic and a Pacific port connected by railroad. So it's sort of a supplement to the Panama Canal. That got shut down by the lack of, when Biden came in and the World Bank and International Monetary Fund said, we're not going to fund it. Suppose we do fund programs like that instead of $200 billion to weapons in Ukraine. That creates the basis for a change. So I see part of my task here in Germany to convince the people I know in the AfD, as well as the people on the so-called left, the Sarah Wagenknecht grouping. There's no reason why there's not sensible people on both of the so-called left and right who could recognize that the people they don't like, the globalists, created this situation, in some cases deliberately. And if you reverse the flow of wealth from the poorest countries and let them keep some of the benefits of their own raw materials and develop the full set manufacturing capacity, then you create a completely different situation. So again, we're talking about a shift to a paradigm of peace from a paradigm which forces countries to fight wars.
All right. It's the beginning of the Jubilee year, and we're going to be optimistic if it fucking kills us.
Well, I think this is where Reagan had a saying, trust but verify. That you can trust in the goodwill of someone, but you have to keep your eyes open. And what you have to watch out for are the City of London and their Wall Street accomplices, because that's where the evil comes from. And the city is still the source of that. In all the work I've done in the last 2 weeks to look at who's trying to sabotage the Gabbard appointment, what keeps coming up is British names. And this goes back to the City of London. The House of Lords put out a report in 2018 which said Trump must be defeated because if he wins re-election in 2020, the special relationship is over. And the special relationship referring to the sharing between the so-called Five Eyes countries. They still think that way. The question is, how do you do it now? And especially since Trump knows he has 4 years, a limited time, how do you stop him? And that's why I think you have this Bannon versus Musk. That's why you have people grabbing on to everything he says and saying he's not going to do the Ukraine situation and so on. So we've got to be consistent. And that means optimism, but it means fighting spirit, John.
And you started off with Bannon, and I think you've done some great work. And there's an essay in the EIR maybe 2 years ago about Bannon and identifying, tracing him back to British intelligence, and the idea.
Henry Jackson Society.
The Henry Jackson Society. Okay.
Yeah, Raheem Kassan, who is one of the leaders of the Henry Jackson Society.
So you identify these people, and then hopefully the rest of the population will start recognizing gradually that they really do want to take America back into their empire, and they use any means that they need to, and it is one case in which the end does justify the means in the minds of the British authorities. The end justifies the means, and that, of course, is the big problem in the world, is that people are willing to do evil on the theory that it's going to ultimately do some good.
Well, just look at who sabotaged the peace between Ukraine and Russia. It was Boris Johnson. Look at what Starmer's doing. Starmer was the one who came to convince Biden to send these missiles that could be attacked inside Russia. So I could just go through this endlessly, but it's the British question that people have to focus on.
Harley, you asked me to remind you that you had to get out of here early today, so it's 11:44 here in the East Coast of the U.S., and I know that means you've got to run for
I've got to run
for a little family obligation. So thank you again. All the best, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Okay, John.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you.